Welcome to ClubhouseNews.com. You're tuned in to Clubhouse News Weekend for the week ending Saturday, April 18th. I'm Hannah.
And I'm Devin. The 2016 presidential election between the Democratic and Republicans is heating up as major candidates like Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio join the race this week. After America's founding fathers broke free from British rule with the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the greatest breakup letter in history, and won the American Revolution in 1783, George Washington became the first president of the USA. Even though he could have ruled like a king, he voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, establishing a tradition that continues till this day. Obama's second 4-year term ends next year, which means American citizens will vote for a new president on November 8, 2016. Before the 2 major parties go head-to-head with the Democratic donkey and the Republican elephant duking it out, voters registered with each party choose a main candidate in a process known as the primary. Hillary Clinton is the Democratic frontrunner, especially since her main competition from 2008's election, Obama, won't be in the running. She was the first lady when her husband, Bill Clinton, was president from 1993 to 2001, and also served as Secretary of State under Obama. Her husband beat President George H.W. Bush's bid for a second term in 1993. Then Bush's son, George W., became president from 2001 to 2009. Bush's brother, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, may join the race this year, which means we could have another Clinton versus Bush battle. If Clinton wins, she'd be the first female president. The Republicans don't have a clear frontrunner yet, but if Senators Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz win, they'll become the country's first Cuban president.
You know what's exciting? We're actually able to vote in that election.
Oh, great!
I know, right? And speaking of presidents, it was Thomas Jefferson's birthday this week and the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Jefferson, born April 13, 1743, was an American founding father and the main author of the Declaration of Independence. He served as vice president to the second president, John Adams, from 1797 to 1801, then defeated him to become president from 1801 to 1809. Jefferson's biggest accomplishments include the Louisiana Purchase, when the USA bought territory from France in 1803, sending out the famous explorers Lewis and Clark to map the country, from 1804 to 1806, and doubling the size of the USA. As for Lincoln, who was elected the 16th president, he led the Northern Union forces to victory in the Civil War against the slave-owning Confederate States of the South and ended slavery with his Emancipation Proclamation. Tragically, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln became the first American president assassinated when the Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth shot him at the Ford's Theater.
That government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Tax Day was on April 15th, and while that might not mean much to you now, it's important to understand what taxes are and why we pay them. In the USA, the government takes a cut of people's paychecks for income taxes, so the federal government can pay for things like the military, firemen, road construction, and aiding people during natural disasters. Back in the 1760s, the American colonies were under British rule, and they didn't like that the Parliament of Great Britain was taxing them from across the sea. When the Stamp Act of 1765 tried forcing Americans to purchase tax stamps for common items like newspapers and playing cards, the colonies boycotted, which means they refused to buy the goods. One of the most famous tax protests was the Boston Tea Party, when Americans dumped chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. And this eventually led to the American Revolution. While people often disagree on how the government should tax people, most agree that some taxation is needed to keep things like clean water, education, and health services working.
Leaders from North, South, and Central America, as well as the Caribbean, met for the Summit of Americas last week, where Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro held the first USA and Cuba talks in 50 years. After the Cuban Revolution of 1959, when Fidel Castro overthrew the government to become an all-powerful communist dictator, the USA cut ties with the island nation and blocked trade with them in a process known as an embargo. They even placed Cuba on a list of state sponsors of terrorism. Cuba's alliance with Soviet Russia during the Cold War from 1947 to 1991 nearly led to global nuclear war in an event called the Cuban Missile Crisis. When Fidel became ill in 2006, his brother Raul took charge, but the USA's embargo held firm. Last December, Obama reopened the diplomatic relations with Cuba, and at the Summit of the Americas, he held historic talks with Castro. The USA will open its embassy in the Cuban capital of Havana again, ease trade restrictions, and even remove Cuba from the state-sponsored terrorism list. As for the embargo, that won't end until America's lawmaking Congress agrees to remove it, which isn't likely since Republicans hold a majority in Congress and they don't agree with opening Cuba's relations.